Hey guys, welcome to another video in this series on Socketcluster and VueJS. In this video, we're going to tackle client-side authentication. I've already made a video on this, but I thought I would make one with VueJS in mind because my last video was using my own SPA application. This is using the VueJS framework. I've made a few alterations to my last video, and as you can tell, now I have a much better mic, so this should be a little more clear and a little easier to follow. So, in order to do this part, there's quite a bit of changes. Obviously, if we're going to be logging in and logging out, we need to have a user account. So the very first thing I did was create a user. Now, before I show you this user, I want to say that when doing users, you never want to store raw passwords, and you also never want to store any passwords in any files you plan on pushing up to your version control, like Git or something. The file I'm about to show you does have a password in plain text. Never, ever do that. And the reason for that is just quick migrations to show you what's going on. You should never, ever show file passwords in plain text, period. So, don't judge me. I wouldn't do this in production. Okay. So, the very first thing we're going to do is use dbmigrate in order to do... You can see my mistake I had here earlier. dbmigrate in order to create a user table where we can store our user information. Okay, you can ignore these other migration files; those are for Eve. We'll get to those later. But currently, I'm going to be using async and dbmigrate to adjust my database how I want. So let's log into my database. I'm using MySQL in this tutorial series. Use Eve app, which is the database I've used. Show tables. You'll see I have a users table in here. Let's remove that down. Count 1. You'll see show tables. It's gone. Okay. Then we'll db migrate up. Show tables. We'll explain users, and we'll see it's a fully built table with a lot of structure. And the cool part about dbmigrate is it allows you to do this, to build, oops, there you go. It allows you to build structured databases. So, you, for example, you can build these migration files in a development environment and just tell all your other developers to run dbmigrate up, and their databases will always be the exact same as your database. Nice way to control your database. We use this all the time in my work. Okay, because dbmigrate doesn't really have a way to handle timestamps very well, I like to have an updated and created at field. So I kind of did this complicated callback here, which you normally wouldn't need to do, but just the way I like to structure my databases. Okay, so you can kind of avoid this if you don't need to have updated at and created at. You can just do it just a standard timestamp. Okay, on the storing passwords in raw text, you'll see right here I'm using SHA-256 package, which, by the way, don't use that anymore. Use bcrypt or something, but this is a quick way just to hash passwords. And because this is in a production environment, I don't care so much about security. This is just an example. Please properly store your passwords. Also, never push up a file that has an insert in it. You don't want anyone to know what your database, what data is in your database. But for the purposes of instruction, this is okay. This is not going on GitHub. Doesn't matter. Plus, I'm just using garbage passwords and information. Obviously, nick@mail.com is not my email, and I'm not using password in any of my accounts. So it doesn't matter. Okay. So you can see, though, easily how I store one quick row in the database, select star from users, and we'll see there is the user. Let's go look at the login. So you'll see here we can refresh. It forces us to go to session create. If we go to standard route, it forces session create because there's no authentication. Just like server-side authentication, right? But this is all client-side. If we go look at the worker, there's no login anywhere in here. There's no login in the routes. You'll see in the routes file, there's no login anywhere. How is this happening? Well, this is really freaking cool. This is something Socketcluster comes with. This authentication way you can do authentication client side. Okay, so let me show you how I accomplish this. Now, normally VueJS, you use HTTP. We're using WebSockets, so our we need some way to communicate with the server, right? The very first way we do that is we create a socket variable. We pull in a server address and a port, I'm also storing the address that I passed in from the so we passed in the address and the port on my env file here. I set an address and a port, and then I pass that in. Though this is, in this case, we're actually using 3000. This file's old. I'm not going to show you my actual env file because my password is sitting right here. I don't want to do that. Okay, but it's the same thing. You get it. So I pass that variable in. If you're familiar with Express, we pass variables into the Jade like so. We render the HTML with Jade, and we assign the variables to an input. They are hidden, so nobody can see them. Also, the whole body is display none. No one's really know about this. It's an easy way to pass it to your JavaScript. Then in Vue, down here on Ready, we grab the address, we grab the port, we remove hidden data. We tell the Vue object that we're done, and then we show the whole app. And then we set up socket connection. Okay? So up here on the setup socket connection right here, okay, we grab the local Vue model. Let's make it a little easier to read. We assign the local socket variable up here to the Socketcluster client-side JavaScript, which is this guy here, this model that gets created. Whoa. What happened there? This class here, which allows us to connect to our local server. Okay, it's kind of complicated. I'm not going to go into that. You can go look at the documentation if you're curious. We say, okay, if it's 443 SSL, we assign secure. Otherwise, not. Obviously, not using SSL here, but that's nice to do for when you do use SSL. Then we say on connect. We say is the user authenticated? If it is, we assign all the authentication variables. Otherwise, we don't allow them to authenticate. And then on authentication, we say authenticated. On deauthenticate, we deauthenticate. Pretty simple, right? Now, I'm going to go into more depth and explain all this stuff more in a minute. But I just want to kind of give you a quick idea of what's going on here. So let me just show you. Okay, so I've already shown you that refreshing, right? Okay. Are changing routes to anything at all. It forces session create. Okay. Now we're going to log in. So if I do something like session create again, oh, there's a bug. Anyway, session create. You'll see that we can normally see these dashboard settings. We'll log out. And then we'll try to go to dashboard again. Dashboard, and it says, no, you can't. Go into the session. There's a few little bugs. I'm just showing the quick little thing. There we go. And you'll see client-side authentication, right? Cool. Okay. So, real quick. Also, I'll show you some error messages. We'll just put in garbage password here. Password does not match. Blah, blah. Unable to find user account. Okay. So what's happening? Now, with Vue.js, you can bind functions to your elements on the page. And so how we're doing that here is right here on this anchor tag, which is the logout button. Or, oops, hold on, I messed it up. We're talking about the login. So go to templates, home, session create here. We have a click prevent button here. We're calling the login function. Here's the create button. You'll see in Vue.js we have an @click. So what this is doing, it's looking for the local Vue model, and it's finding that function. And also we're preventing the default. And the Vue, you'll see the login function right here. We grab the local Vue model. We call we'll go over this WebSocket function in a second. WebSocket function, we're saying session, hold on. That's the logout. Keep going to logout. I'm sorry. Login, here we go. I'll go to the local VM here. We go session login. We pass the email and the password, which you'll see on the template create here. We bind the vModel email, vModel password, which if you're familiar with Vue at all, which I'm assuming you're somewhat familiar with Vue, this series is more about teaching you how to connect Socketcluster and Vue. you'll see on, I keep losing that file, create.js, session, there you go. You'll see that this email and password is bound to this Jade file right here. We pass it to the Socketcluster, and we handle it. So, and then we have a callback function that we handle on the return. So you'll see that it's pretty easy to create logins. Now this is all working in depth. It's a little more complicated, but I just wanted to show you the quick model on session create and kind of what's going on, how you bind functions quickly, and how you run things. Now, let's go in depth exactly what's going on here. Okay, with Vue, right, you have components. Okay, so with the Vue router, we register the Vue components with the Vue router, and then the Vue router loads the components based on their definition. Okay, so everything's done at the router level starting out. So let's go look at the router. Okay, on the router we added this session route, so it maps anything with session here to this route here. We have a sub route of create, so you'll see create, okay, and it loads the component session auth, which if you look at, let's do home, you look at our session create here, this file is loaded before the router, so session create up here, session route here is the same name as this component. So I mean, you could actually, if you really wanted to, you could just literally run everything from your router like that, and it works just fine. But it's more clean to do it this way, I believe. Okay, we'll talk about the auth function in a little bit, the auth variable in a little bit. So it maps this route here to this map here. Clear enough, right? That's the Vue router. Okay. And then the template that's building from, this is where it builds the HTML. You can come in here and directly, if you want to, add in HTML, like I showed you before. So you say H3, and we could say hello world, right? We will rebuild our templates, reload, and you'll see it loads in hello world right there, right? But we want to use actual templates. So we're using Templatizer, which I've showed you in the previous videos, and gulp file here. Templatizer on load, it takes whatever's in this folder here, builds a JavaScript file called templates. You can go look at the templates file here. Okay, you'll see that here, here's the session create, here's the HTML you can see, right? Very clear. And then in the template file up here, we call that function. Templatizer is a global function available everywhere on the app, client side. So on index up here, we load the template file as you see here, where we saved it. We just call it directly. We say just the folder structure. So templatizer and session create. And yes, you can pass variables in if you want, but because we're using Vue, we don't need to. And then we bind on that session. Let's clean this up a little bit. This is really getting hard to follow. Okay, so on our template here, which is, you can see template, we are binding a vmodel email, vmodel password to vmodel email, vmodel password. Oh, excuse me, email password. And if you want to see what it looks like real quick as it binds, we'll just do this real quick. Email. Like so. Let's rebuild our template. And yes, you can use gulp to automatically do that. I'll probably do that in the next video or so. But it's already complicated enough. I didn't want to keep adding more complexity. So we'll just watch this. And then watch this. So, oops. So as you see, it's auto-updating. See that? See how it's updating? Pretty cool. Pretty cool, right? So Vue binds this input to this data attribute, and as on key up, it's constantly updating that value, which is really cool. So you can grab it at any time dynamically. Okay, so with this component here, wow. We want to obviously send that data to the server check the database, to make sure that this email here and this password here matches what we submitted, right? And then on return, you want to set the user data, right? And if there's an error, display something. Okay, that makes sense. So let's show you how that's done. The very first thing you need to do is create the connection with the server, which I've shown you on the index. Let's go home. Oh, no, well, we'll just go grab it directly. Home index here. I include the socket cluster here. Once again with vue.js here. We on ready. We call the setup socket connection function, which up here we make a connection. And on connect, you can see clearly, right? Socket cluster will handle everything else as long as these variables are correct. Yes, you don't need secure. I just do that. You don't have to have that. All you need is hostname and port. And if it's localhost, you can actually just do this. But that doesn't work for servers and stuff. But for just testing, you can do it that way. And then on the worker down here, you'll see when on a connection, when something's made, we're console logging the client data, and then we're going to handle messages that come through. So let's show you what that looks like. Gulp. You'll see. Watch, nothing. And then the client should auto-connect here in a second. Maybe it won't. We'll just refresh. You'll see forced reconnect, and we'll reconnect again. Reconnect. See? It connects. Pretty cool. Okay, so we're doing the socket connections through our view here, because more than one component's going to use the same function over and over again. So I wrote this little WebSocket function here, which passes in a bunch of arguments and a callback. Okay, so we bind the view model, which actually we really don't need to do that. We could just do that, but I like to do it's by habit. I do this everywhere. We bind this current socket, who sent the data to the arguments, and then we emit a messages data packet. And on the worker up here, we're listening to messages. So the arguments, whatever's passed in, is right here, and whatever callback is on the respond. Okay. Now, because this is an MVC, we need a controller and a model. So Node doesn't really have a good way, in my opinion, to register controllers. So I kind of like to make my own. I make my own kind of controller, which handles all the controllers. So up here, you'll see I made a controller where I can register routes in the controller. Okay. And then on here, I did it again. There you go. Messages, there you go. We require that file up here, and then we grab whatever controller we're calling for and whatever method we're calling for, and we pass the data into that method of the controller. In this case, it's session. So we can go back to the create. We can say, look, we're looking for session and login. So on the controller up here, session. So you go to the session controller and login. And you'll see we pass in data, client data and respond from the worker right here. Okay. And then now, since we've submitted a user, we need to go to the users and find a user in the database by email. So use the user's model right here, user's model. Okay. Now I'm using the prototype way of doing this. You can do it however you want. One of the old ways I used to do is just directly just pass in functions like this. You can say, find by email, and then just however or actually it's like that, and then client date. In this case, we're just doing like email, and then respond, right? And then we need our database, so process.pool, and then you can do like your pool.query select star from. Well, I'm really butchering that. Select star from users or whatever, right? But I actually kind of like this new prototype way of doing things. Well, not new. This is kind of the more standard way of doing things. And a lot of this stuff is kind of extra stuff I don't really need, but I tend to copy from more complicated ones, so I tend to have all this junk in here you don't need. You really could actually just do this, actually. But anyway, okay. So so we create a new user model here with some functions we can call. Although defined by email is the only one we really need at the moment. So see, we pass in data.email, which once again from the create up here, email, and session we pass in the data up here, data.email, and we pass in a callback function to handle the return. On the users, we go and we select star from users where email equals whatever. So it's going to check this field right here with whatever gets passed in. And we say if there's an error, we're going to console log that error because we're curious about what the error is. And then we're going to return, hey, unable to find user account, because obviously we're not able to find the user account. And then otherwise, if there is no rows that returned, well, there's no error in the SQL, but there wasn't any data. So we're just going to say, okay, well, there's no user account, right? We might as well say the same thing, because we don't need the client using the application to know whether it was a database error or just no users. We don't really want them to know that. It's more for us. And then if there is, if there's no error and there are some rows returned, we just return the first row, first matching row. And then here we pass it in, see the error and the user. We say if there's an error, we respond with the error. Otherwise, we go through and we say if there's no user, this is null essentially. Which, by the way, we handle that here, but just to be ultra safe, well, we say if there's no user, we return using the user account found. Otherwise, we make sure we grab the password. We delete the password from the user because we're going to be returning this user data back to the client. We don't want to be passing in our hash, obviously, to the client. That'd be very bad. If somebody were able to get a hold of that, they could easily figure out what hash we're using and make it much easier to break our authentication, or excuse me, our hashing. Okay, so then we delete the password. We save the user data up here in results, and then we call back. So we go to the next function. This is the node way of doing async stuff. You can do it different, but this is kind of how I tend to do it. The next function we're going to be calling is we're verifying the password. So we're using this new password library up here, which once again, models, password, same thing. Verify. We're passing in the password that they sent in and then the hash from the database. And we encrypt the password that they passed in, match it against the hash that we have in the database. If they match, we return true, otherwise we return false. So we can say if not verified, then we're going to return, hey, passwords don't match. So we can see that here. We can say, blah, blah, passwords does not match. That's this string right here. Otherwise, we're going to set the authentication token. This is really important here because this does the Socketcluster authenticate, which on the view down here, it'll fire this function right here, which is how we know to remove this page and go to the dashboard. Okay. And then we'll call back. Since there were no errors, we'll return null for the error and then return the results. So we have user data. And then on the create function, we finally return from the server. We're going to say if there's no error, if there is an error, we're going to growl it, which is what you just saw there. That's the growl. We'll go over that in a second. Otherwise, since it's return, we don't have to do else or anything. And then since we got to this part of the function because of the return, there's no return. We can set the user data that got passed back. So in Vue, we go to the set user data and we just assign that data, which is why if you do pass in a proper data set, you'll see the name here because that got sent from the database, Nick Gothenburg. Cool. Okay. So that's kind of how the server communication and client communication works back and forth. It's kind of a lot there. But that's okay. I think it's clear enough. Now let's get into how we're handling the refresh. So the cool part about this is you would think, okay, well, you set an authentication token, Nick. That's interesting enough. But if you refresh, how does it know that you're still good? Well, Socketcluster assigns, even though you may have even a different IP, it assigns a auth in your browser and it matches that with the server. And if it's good, it will automatically call this authenticate function here, and will auto authenticate, which will we will on connect, we can get that is authenticated. We'll grab the auth token from the browser and we'll just set our variables. Pretty cool. right? And then obviously it will go to the page. So we can see that. Refresh. You see? Refresh again. It's authenticated. We log out. We refresh. We go to dashboard. Nothing. Forces this page. And I need to fix that. Obviously my loading is not quite right. But you can see there we go. And then we can log in again. And then we're good to go. There you go. Socketcluster authentication. I explained this in more detail in one of my earlier videos. If this doesn't make much sense, please, by all means, take a look at the documentation. Socketcluster.io. Go down here and click the authentication button. And you can look at all the data. There's so much here. I mean, this is just a small part. This is my old video here if you want to see it. And then there we go. I appreciate you guys' time. Thanks for watching. If you have any more questions, please post below. I'm available quite a bit, so I should get back to you pretty quickly. And then thanks guys for watching. I think in the next video we're going to get more into actual Vue.js and get away from Socketcluster quite so much, because I'm sure that's probably something you guys are more interested in, is the Vue.js part, not the Socketcluster part. If you are, either way, let me know. I'll go in whatever direction you guys drive me in. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, enjoy it, please like it, and thanks guys.